What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Game Dev Unchained, the #1 game development podcast about game development and the lifestyle thereof. I am Brandon Pham, and with me a special guest, Alex Silkin. I got it?
That's how you pronounce it. Yep.
All right. Cool. Thanks for joining us. This is the part of the podcast, Alex, where I kind of ask our guest, which is yourself, to talk about yourself a little bit, a little preview of where you've been, where you are right now, where you're heading.
Yeah, so I've been doing professional game development for about 10 years. So I was going to USC to study video game programming, and for essentially what became my thesis project, we created this virtual reality hardware, software prototype, kind of like a math science experiment with a whole bunch of wires and bolting like headset and these motion controllers to a helmet, to bike a helmet. And eventually that was in 2012. And we started a company based on that and built a few rounds of increasingly sophisticated prototypes. But when the VR consumer market became mature enough to have actual platforms to sell on, we've ported our games and essentially started focusing on just delivering games to consumers. We also did a bunch of like application-based entertainment for a bit, but that slowly kind of shut down right before COVID, which is, I guess, good timing because COVID definitely, kind of killed that industry for a bit. But we're finally on the other side, and we've released a whole bunch of games, and now we're focused on IP licenses ever since our like really big hit with Creed, Rise to Glory, which is a boxing game based on the movie. And now the latest game that we're working on. We've announced it. We haven't really shown much of it. It's based on Aliens movies, so it's a kind of like a sci-fi horror game. I guess. Sort of a spiritual, well, I think that's setting a lofty goal, but we are spiritually inspired, I guess, by the Alien Isolation game. So we're hoping to create a compelling virtual reality focused follow-up to the game.
Yeah, for the listeners out there, I think the life cycle of the VR landscape, I feel like anybody who puts on a VR gets it. I feel, if anything, all first-person shooters should be VR based, right? That's just my personal opinion on things. Like in terms of the technology, it's impressive and it's fun. When I play Half-Life Alyx, it's like, yeah, this is how basically everything should be. And if we were to just look at the last 10 years, I know we kind of connected on my last rant on the Roundtable News, and I kind of expressed my attitudes where I feel like, the last 10 years has been like this huge incline of VR interest. COVID kind of hampered it a bit, which was a weird period because, if anything, to me, that was like where VR should have been striking the hardest, and where everyone was stuck at their computer with not a lot of choices to go outside and congregate and interact with live people. And now it's kind of making, I feel, another push with the recent announcement of the Apple product, right? So if you can, you being a developer in that space for a while, I would love to hear your general perspective of what's going on right now in this space. Is Apple making an impact? Is it something that, is there another second, surge of VR interest that is happening, and everybody should start paying attention as developers, as gamers? Like what is to be expected in the next 5 years with the VR AR space? Because it feels like they're kind of synonymous now, the AR VR space. It's like one and the same, but not really, right? The technology is different, but now we're wearing these devices that should be able to do both, is the expectation. It's a lot of questions, but would love to kind of hear your response.
Yeah, I think consumers or people in general have very short attention spans. They quickly forget about some exciting things to happen when they're eclipsed by other exciting news. And I'm very excited about the Vision Pro. But I think, just a few months ago, PSVR 2 came out. And I think that was actually a pretty big step for premium consumer home virtual reality. I mean, that's on one hand, like anyone who's been playing PC based VR games, I think they'll find that in some ways, it's really just catching up. It's eclipsing in many ways, but the index kind of set a really high bar for the optics and the resolution, field of view of the hardware. But with PSVR 2, not only are we finally matching that, but we actually have gaze-based tracking for the first time kind of available to a mass market. And I think Sony has just done such a big push for immersion across both non-VR and virtual reality. So the haptics in the head, but also the adaptive triggers and the controllers just provide such an additional kind of way of input output for content to kind of keep maturing. Of course, the PS5 is a pretty powerful piece of machinery. So we'll be, of course, on one hand, we have Quest, which is just so much more approachable, has mass market, but it is also kind of like a mobile-based headset, and I'm excited the Quest 3 is coming out. The Quest Pro also has better processing. But in the end, you can't really, it's just the reality of like a dedicated big box that's rendering your game. So I'm excited for, the graphical fidelity that we're going to see from PSVR, games like we already have Resident Evil Village, the VR port, but we also have Resident Evil 4 VR mode that was showcased. And those really look next gen graphically. So I'm really excited about that. And of course, the Apple Vision Pro, now that's what everyone's talking about. I think, I went to Augmented World Expo like the week before that, and it was kind of awkward because everyone was just waiting for next week, waiting for like these news that like this event was eclipsing it and hasn't even happened. I think hardcore VR gamers might be a little bit confused by the Vision Pro kind of form factor. I mean, there's no motion controllers, like you can't. That's what I think a lot of people who've been playing VR games are kind of focused on. Like, how does this even make sense for the games and experiences that we've been used to? And they didn't showcase a lot of gaming focus at their announcement. They were actually focused a lot on it seems like traditional, almost like 2D screens projected in augmented space. But in some sense, like that is actually a much bigger market, right? Like the VR market is still somewhat niche. It's grown a lot. With the people really like to talk about the 20 million Quest headsets out there, which is, and I think as many as Xbox Series S/X. I might be misremembering the stat, but you can't really call VR niche because then you're calling Xbox niche, which is not really true.
Right.
I think with the Vision Pro, the Vision Pro, they're chasing a much bigger market though. They can theoretically replace every single screen in your life, which I think is a much more ambitious goal. It's also, I think, in some ways a little scary that one device from one single company can theoretically now like replace every single device and can now sit like right between the consumer and all the other content out there, all the other creators. I'm wondering how that's going to work out. But on the other hand, at least right now, they're not going to be able to deliver at least that niche of really I think action-oriented, VR experiences that require buttons and require finesse. But on the other hand, like as we've seen, with the mobile game market, that iOS is really like propelled into the mainstream and kind of eclipsed traditional gaming. I think, it doesn't make sense to bet against Apple, and they're potentially creating kind of like a whole new type of consumer, a whole new type of experience, that is potentially going to be really, really popular. And it's going to be much more approachable. That, just to put on a headset and play some more, experience some more casual kind of experiences that you can just, touch and look at. So I'm definitely kind of excited, excited about that, but also kind of scared.
there definitely seems to be a net positive in terms of all the all the factors, right? I mean, we're talking about the console, right? And PSVR is definitely a huge component that I think, because it lives within its own ecosystem, that people are not as, which is weird because, the original VR, the Oculus, was kind of conceived for gamers, right? That was the niche market. That's how it grew. And that's how it basically essentially got acquired because that crowd was just really pushing it. And it was just presenting a lot of potential, right? And yeah, and at the Quest right now is at 20 million units sold. We're looking at PlayStation 5. I think the last time I read it was like near to 40 million, like hardware potentially to sell PSVR 2, right? The funny thing about PSVR games is that it's very focused and they're very polished experience. And in a way, PlayStation, Sony, they kind of are okay with like really investing in that space and not having to look towards like a return immediately, right? I feel like with the Quest and the PC market in particular, there's got to be like a tremendous pressure on the developers to immediately look for profit or trying to drive sales immediately because they're kind of on their own. I'm not sure, and maybe you can comment on how Meta is very supportive of that, right? But like, the weird thing that I compliment Apple for, I kind of criticize Meta for, right? Those are kind of like the big two right now for the market, even though Sony, again, it's weird. Sony's like this weird cousin that, like, yeah, they count, but like in the grand scheme of things, at least when you talk to referring to the tech space, no one's like putting PSVR in like, is this going to change the future? It's like, no, it's used for a bunch of gamers, right? But PSVR is like a very strong contender for sure, in terms of how it shapes the VR space. But how Apple is kind of going for what you're saying, I think you put it pretty in a very good way. How it's trying to replace every screen. I didn't even think of it as that. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the computer screen, the TV screen, it's not just for phones, right? It's basically every screen that you interact with. That is a huge potential market. And we have to remember Apple single-handedly basically ushered in the smartphone era, right? I mean, there were other smartphones existing before, but nothing like pretty much after, there was a clear indication of where Apple came into the space because every phone started to kind of copy its design pretty immediately, right? And I see the same with Apple, where yeah, they're going for a bigger space, and at the same complaint for the phone in terms of games is starting to apply for this Apple Vision Pro, right? It's like, well, where are the buttons? It's like, well, they single-handedly made a mobile market, and the last time I checked data, traditional gaming have always been just a small percentage of the whole gaming market. They actually shrunk the last year. Traditional gaming is shrinking compared to the rest of the mobile market or casual gamers, basically, right? So that's something to be, cautious about, and shows how strong, at least with younger generation, a whole market that was just born in the last 15 years is overtaken and sustaining and kind of cannibalizing, the gaming market overall. So who's to say that Apple Vision Pro, with this gestures base, and let's not forget that you can use a control. They just straight up use a Sony controller for a lot of the games to kind of make it cross-platform. That Vision Pro is just going to create its own market again. The Black Mirror market of video game interaction that might be even more compelling than even the casual mobile market, right? My argument with Meta is that Meta, I feel, even though they showcase a lot of games on their side, sometimes whenever I view Meta News, they always talk about their little virtual social space that mirrors a lot of like Nintendo World, right? And I was like, well, I don't think this is. To me, it doesn't feel like these are made by, not to disrespect the game developers that work there. It's just like, this is just very basic, you know. This is not even WoW-ish, you know. It's like we've made WoW 10 years ago that looks and plays much better than this, and I feel it's a step backwards. And thankfully, I feel with a competitive with a competitor like Apple, I think Meta is taking notice and making something more compelling than that in the following year, or else they know they're going to get squashed. Apple is such a force. No one should underestimate their ability to go into a space and basically recreate it, re-envision from the ground up, and market it better than most people. So I guess in conclusion, I'm kind of conflicted. I know that space is going to grow because I've never seen anyone put on a VR set and walk away disappointed or going meh. It's like, oh my God, I get it, right? But like the steps of getting people into those things have been a barrier. And like you said before with PC, you know, having a PC hardware that can run these type of games have been, you know, definitely niche, right? PlayStation definitely helps the Quest, you know, having a standalone device is a step in the right direction, but Apple just makes that sexier, right? I mean, they pretty much bypass the whole weight thing and just like, we're just gonna put metal on metal, polished, look awesome, because you want to look awesome. And the demos, I think it by far it was the best presentation I've ever seen for any types of VR device. They just know they just know what the consumers want. And as a gamer, I'm impressed by it, even though they didn't show any games, right? So if you were to look, and it seems like obviously you're super excited. The pandemic was kind of weird because it focused on other technologies, right? I thought it was a period that VR and AR would actually get a boost, but instead blockchain or NFT and all these stupid things kind of distract everybody, right? And then died coincidentally right after COVID was over. When you were in the thick of the developing VR applications and games, what were you thinking in those 2-year period? It was like, what is going on? Like, I feel like that distraction was not just by the consumer, but I'm sure investors or publishers were putting VR in the backseat a bit, right? Just like, hey, this is, you know, the hot new stuff is this one right here. What was that period like?
Yeah, honestly, COVID was like 3 years of living in like upside down like world where everything that you thought would happen like didn't happen or happen in reverse, and time kind of like stood still. So it's just like a very confusing moment. And I think, you know, in the beginning there was like a lot of issues with the supply chains. You know, I'm very impressed that PS5 and Xbox Series S and X, basically, as far as I remember, shipped like on time, and Quest 2 also shipped, like didn't get delayed and actually released like at the end of 2020, as far as I remember. But that, I think you have to thank the fact that, you know, the majority of the development happened, you know, before COVID actually started. Granted, you know, obviously all the factories shut down. You know, I imagine they were able to build up some stock, and afterwards there were issues with, you know, actually, I mean, for like 2 years. I mean, I think this year was the first year finally you could like just get a PS5 on a whim.
Yeah.
You know, Quest 2 was just like always out of stock as far as I remember. You know, Xbox and PS5 also, like, you know, this giant resale market on eBay, and, you know, Sony had their PlayStation Direct initiative to help people kind of like get around the scalpers and like get into like this like lottery system. Like I used, you know, I wanted a PS5 for my birthday in, I think 21, or was it 2020? I think it was 21. Yeah, because it shipped in 2020. And I used 5 computers to get a PS5 because I just locked into the like PS5. I even like used my girlfriend at the time. Like she like locked in her phone, and I think she's the one who actually got it. Like that's how difficult it was to get hardware back then. To anyone listening, sorry, I cheated the system, but I really wanted a PS5 for my birthday, and at least I wasn't like scalping it for like thousands of dollars. I actually ended up getting an Xbox for like twice the price from like Walmart because I was just like, screw it, I just don't want to jump through these hoops.
Yeah.
And so we were a little bit concerned about just the VR industry was already kind of constrained in terms of like how many people had these devices, and now all of a sudden you had an additional like artificial barrier to people even getting the devices. So we actually started diversifying away from VR in the last few years, and we released like one non-VR mode for like a puzzle game called Puzzle Bobble, which on PS5 you could play it in non-VR, and then for a big hit Creed, we released a non-VR port on PS4. And of course, it runs PS5 and Xbox and Switch, because we just weren't sure if the VR market was just going to really die. But it kind of went the opposite. Despite all the shortages of devices, they were still flying off the shelves, and people were all kind of locked at home, and they needed that escape. And gaming did really benefit from the pandemic, from just like the increased sales of people just sitting at home. There's like a lot of kind of new customers who decided to pick up a game for the first time. There was existing customers who, just had way more free time and free money on their hands. So VR market actually kind of really grew over COVID. Of course, then it kind of led to this whole like mad dash to metaverse, which is kind of mixed with this whole like Web3, like crypto-based like movement. So that muddied the water. And now like on the other side, like coming out, we're seeing again, PSVR 2 did come out, and that's growing the market on one end. Of course, it's like more hardcore market. The Quest is increasingly, investing into the ecosystem. They've sold, 20 million plus Quest 2s, and Quest 3 is coming out with a more AR focused. And of course, I think the Vision Pro is going to force a lot more people to double down or re-enter the market. Like, I think I've already seen like rumors of Google, like potentially trying to do something again, because I think everyone is realizing that Apple can potentially replace, every single screen in your life. So they're potentially going to cut out everyone. So you're not going to be like juggling like 10 different headsets, like every time you want to switch a service or something. Like, you're going to be doing it through whatever set of goggles you have. So yeah, I mean, you got to give credit to Apple for, pushing the, like, competition is always kind of good in the end for kind of pushing the industry forward. So sort of like the space race, or I guess the AR VR race, or the metaverse race. I think there's always been this excitement of VR, AR, XR, I guess is it called now, as being like the next computing platform. That dream has been kind of with us since the beginning. I mean, since all the like sci-fi movies of like Lawnmower and Lawnmower Man and, The Matrix. But it has been very much gaming focused. Like, a lot of technologies in the end, like, led by gaming first. It's entertainment, it's fun. It pushes the hardware kind of to its limits. Facebook at the time, now they call themselves Meta, Zuckerberg, they bought Oculus really not for gaming. Like, they bought them for the future of computing. Right. Just talking to various people who are at Meta, have worked at Meta, there's always been this big push for how do we make Quest the computing platform of the future. They've invested a lot into various like features, platform features, like all their, plans were always from this angle. And it has, from, talking to people there, there's been a lot of kind of friction and confusion because, from the top, you get this kind of messaging of like, this is a computer, like, how do we put these productivity tools in there? But then everyone like on the floor working and like looking at the numbers is realizing that the people who are buying these things and what they're using for is gaming. right? So, and of course, you can drive yourself towards the vision, but on the other hand, you can't. I think you don't want to probably alienate your
Core
golden
audience. Yeah.
your core audience. The duck that's laying the golden eggs, or whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
And I think there's always the element of like just being there too early. I think with the Apple Vision Pro, potentially we're kind of getting there, but they're kind of like standard Apple, or they've done this with the iPhone, right? Like when they came out with a device that was like way more expensive, way higher specs in order to create a much more polished user experience to maybe solve the problems that are stopping this kind of medium from becoming mainstream, right? And I think Apple's innovation is not just the software, the hardware, the UX, but it's also kind of like financial innovation in the sense that they let you finance the thing, right? So I think it was like Steve Ballmer's kind of really like aged like milk quote of saying that no one's going to want to buy an $800 phone, right? Because all the other phones were like 3-4 times, a quarter of the price. And now Apple is coming out with a headset that is, 3 times more expensive than the Quest Pro, which is kind of like Meta's highest spec headset. That it came out with a $1,400 price, and people were unhappy and said it was overpriced, and they lowered the price to $1,000. And honestly, like I use Quest Pro as my daily driver now. Like it's got amazing clear optics, and I mean, I primarily use it for PC development. And it's important. Like that's how we develop all our software. In the end, it's all about iteration. Like you want to iterate on PC. So you're always going to need some kind of device that hooks into your computer, which I guess like the Vision Pro, that's probably going to hook into your computer. Like that's the other big question of like, can you use Windows to develop for it? Because if you go to use Macs, like most gaming studios just like have Windows PCs. Like there's a lot of like question marks of like how that's going to work. Like, are they going to support OpenXR as the standard? Like, is it going to be easy well, I mean, they're partnering obviously with Unity. So like, that's one way to like write once and target multiple devices. Although again, if like at the Unity level, you're still like using like the OpenXR plugin or the Oculus plugin, et cetera. So I'm wondering how that's going to work. Like how the ecosystem is going to grow, because it's also going to, if a lot of the issues with the early VR development was how fractured it was, lack of standardization across the software and the hardware. On the hardware side, like every single manufacturer had such drastically different controller like button layout, just the type of buttons on there, the feature set. So that just like really makes your life as a developer, as a designer, as a software engineer, trying to figure out how to properly maximize the user experience for that. And of course, it's also bad for the consumer because like it's already a very like kind of complicated like new market for tech savvy individuals. But now you have to like figure out like which device do you get when they're also different. And on top of that, like which, now we have exclusives, like which games run on which, and VR already has so much friction of putting it on. Now you don't want to really juggle like multiple of these devices in your life. Right. So, I think basically, I'm sure Apple is going to come out with some financing. They're going to sell allegedly 500,000 of these in the first year. So it's not exactly going to eclipse Quest. I think, as Zuckerberg said, his viewpoint is like he's trying to make the most like mainstream, like affordable device. So we sort of have like, I don't know, like sort of like a Tesla versus like a Toyota, I guess, situation. I think, in the end, there's a lot of Toyotas being sold and there's a lot of Teslas being sold. But most people just have one.
Yeah, I think there's obviously enough space for these two to kind of fight it out. I mean, look at how many consoles we have, or traditional consoles that we have that are still around, right? Even though Xbox is always in trouble. Uh, I mean, that's the thing that people do forget. There's a lot of quests out there. 20 million copies, 20 million units sold or more, right? Uh, I gotta ask, delve more into the metaverse thing. Yeah, metaverse is one of those things that got kind of thrown in the bag in the last, the COVID years, right? As a developer, as a game developer, right, who are totally bought into the VR system, totally understand why people are buying these things, right? They want to play games, right? Primarily. And then you see a company like Meta who are making these devices, and every keynote is kind of centered around like working, right? It's like, how do I make Zoom VR? It's like, what are you talking about? Who wants to work? Who wants to put on this to work more, right? And I feel like there's such a disconnect to the original vision to what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is just not cool at all. But they're trying to pawn it out. I mean, the confusion that you're speaking to internally, I've friends there too, shows at these showcases. It's like it's a confusing message of whether they want to be this productivity, which is very niche. It's even nichier than games, right? Productivity thing, and or they want to be. Well, I mean, I think not until Apple Vision showcased what they wanted to be, their lifestyle, right? Their lifestyle hardware. It's like, this is going to improve your life in these ways, right? They're going to nail that. Their demo already shows that they get it. I just find Meta still confused on who they want to be, right? I still think obviously they have a lead, and it's a cheaper hardware compared to Apple Vision. They're gonna enjoy this, until eventually I either match, Apple Vision catches up, right? Uh, the metaverse, right? What were your thoughts about that? Like, you're constantly watching these updates because you have to. You're like, I got to be on the cusp of technology, and you're like, what are you doing? We're making way cooler stuff than this. What are they doing? So I want to understand from your perspective as a developer and on VR and game focus and seeing these type of things. And am I misconstruing the feelings here, where I'm the frustration of what's happening?
Yeah, I'm gonna go on a long tangent.
Okay.
Starting actually with something that's almost like completely left side, but you mentioned like Xbox struggling. Like, I have all the consoles. I've actually, like, this is my first Xbox that I bought, and surprisingly I ended up using it more than PlayStation. Like, the Game Pass is a great, great choice for consumers. Of course, they just announced today that they're raising the price. So, it's the curse of both services: come around with a low price, maybe try out the competition, and eventually, raise the price back to what it was. And then all of a sudden you've turned to the dark side. you're the evil, the evil corporation that has replaced the previous evil corporation. But I think, Microsoft also, I'm a huge fanboy. I interned there like for 2 summers, had an amazing time, like growing as a software engineer and as a young person. And, Microsoft has Xbox, and it has, Office, right? And of course, like, Windows with whatever. It's like a giant corporation that is able to target to such a wide breadth of, both like B2B and consumers. And, I think they have this Xbox brand that is like, has a very clear identity. Like, even if you go to like the Microsoft Redmond HQ, like the Xbox buildings are like very different. It's like, feels like you're in a gaming company. Like, they have statues of, like, as far as I remember, it was like Halo, Gears of War or something, versus the corporate, like more corporate atmosphere of like the Office teams, etc. Right. So like with Meta, I think part of the issue is that they rebranded the entire company under this like Meta umbrella, which feels a little bit like aged like milk kind of situation, because they rebranded to metaverse, that's what meta stands for. And then like suddenly a few months later, just like the entire concept just became so burnt out and has like kind of negative like taste in like a lot of consumers like minds, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's almost like a ancient. It feels like this kind of like ironic tragedy, right? They were trying to escape from the Facebook branding because that also got really spoiled by all the scandals of like the election alleged, or I don't know, somewhat proved maybe like election interference. Whether real or not, like the damage was done to their brand. So they were trying to fix their brand by going to Meta and consolidating on everything under that. And then, they had this Oculus brand that they purchased that had a lot of existing kind of positive vibes from consumers and, the association with virtual reality. Right. And they decided to, kind of completely, phase that out in favor of just like having the Quest brand. Right. And it was like also such a confusing transition with like them creating so many different accounts and trying to merge the accounts. And like, they still have like on the PC, they still have a Oculus client with the Oculus logo. And some of the websites still say Oculus, but some of them just say Quest. And I'm wondering how much that has actually like backfired or has caused some of these issues where they, instead of just like doing the Xbox route where they can keep this like gaming focused brand that people know as Meta, but like it's also Oculus. Of course, maybe it was confusing to be like Meta, Quest, Oculus, in their mind. I don't know. That said, it's a Microsoft Xbox. Actually, you really probably shouldn't learn from Microsoft for naming things because like, their naming has been super confusing going from Xbox One to Series S and Series X. So
I lost count. Yeah.
It's difficult, like naming things, this is why we have ChatGPT now. So hopefully you can just have AI help you name things. Yeah. But so there's this kind of dissonance of Meta trying to do all these things and, them rebranding as Meta and having that somewhat confusing like showcase where they showed the future through a bunch of like renderings of like Mark Zuckerberg doing fun things in virtual environments, but they're all, as far as I understand, just like renders. Well, it's like, the problem, you really want to be like right at the cusp of something when it's like a little bit early where like, maybe like 30% of the people think it's the cool thing and 70% of the people still think it's like kind of like science fiction or whatever. And then you were able to push the progress forward and become that, make that mainstream. Like you're a little bit, if you're like way too early, then you're basically just writing science fiction, right? Like the technology is not there. The consumer desire is not there. Right. And it felt a little bit like that showcase was that because they were literally just showing like trying to inspire, people watching of like, this is the future, but it's kind of confusing because normally showcases are like, this is the future, like next year. Like we have a trailer for a game that's coming out. Like you're going to be playing this game next year, not like this is the future. Like we literally made a sci-fi movie to show you of like what the future in like 5 to 10, years is going to be. This is why we are renaming the company behind it. I mean, I guess it's ballsy, but I think it's a little bit too ambitious in some ways and maybe crumbled under its own ambition. I think, I'm split because I am a futurist. I grew up like reading and watching science fiction. Like, I read Snow Crash, which as far as I remember has coined the metaverse term. Mm-hmm. But I also, on the other hand, kind of like a realist and like with these desires of somehow connecting all these games together and having this like whole economy, like a lot of people were saying like, this is kind of doesn't seem like it makes sense from a design perspective or like, why do even what is the intent? Like, what is the desire of connecting like multiple games together? Like, how does that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what the vision is, but from me, it seems like there's no real benefit to each experience to try to like connect these economies together. And maybe I'm just, a little bit too old school in my way of thinking.
You don't have the vision, man. That's the problem. You have the blinders on.
Yeah, so much of it was just about, it seemed like recreating these economies that we have in the real world, but in the digital world. But in my mind, it's like the real world sucks. Mm-hmm. Like we're basically recreating the issues that are plaguing the real world, which is like speculation and like overpriced assets. It's like, great, like you're too poor to buy a house in real life. So we're going to make another set of like virtual real estate that you're also too poor to buy. Mm-hmm. Like what? Yeah. Like how does that actually make, like I'm, again, I have a very myopic view of like, I like to make video games and I like to like bring joy to people. And like, I feel like the point of games is to like have fun. Of course, it's also a business. That's the problem. It's always being pulled of like, well, how do we actually like, how do we take, how do we charge players to play the game? And, I guess it would be just to try to like get some kind of fair exchange of like fun for money. But then sometimes, it feels like it's kind of predatory of like, let's just make some kind of like addicting system that will try to extract as much money out of the players, Yeah. So I think, everyone got super excited by everyone having to be stuck at home, I guess. And suddenly seeing such huge spikes of, people working remote and playing at home. And they thought that they thought the world was never going to change again. Mm-hmm. They thought the world could never change how it changed COVID. And they thought, oh, well, now there's no way it's going to change again. And it did.
Well, people are saying going to the movies was dead. I was like, dude, it's just taking a breather right now,
Right. So, I mean, we have Roblox, right? So like Roblox is sort of a metaverse and we are seeing so many kids play that and they're going to keep growing up with that. And I think, again, just today, I think the news was that they announced that they're allowing 17 plus, like basically more mature experiences to be created on Roblox. Yeah. So a lot of the confusion from metaverse is like this term just became so loaded. Like, what does it mean? People read again, like Snow Crash, watch movies, they like see one thing versus like what we have now. And this whole concept of like Web3, it's like the web of the future, which on one hand can mean like spatial internet, kind of like AR, VR, like being able to like sort of like go inside your websites or like instead of going on a boring, like maybe not boring, but pretty looking 2D website of like shoes and like scrolling through shoes, like you could go inside of a virtual like shoe store and like put on a shoe in your avatar and see how they fit or whatever. Right. So that's one exciting kind of like vision. And the other one is, well, decentralization. So you're no longer dependent on like one single service and decentralization of currencies as well. So that, maybe like some of the like don't tread on me folks probably like really excited about that. So like no longer, be controlled by the government and have like free flow of currency and kind of like virtual assets. And like these two things kind of like combined together in some ways. And, and the concept of like connecting everything together, like it's not really clear how this is going to work. So like Roblox is sort of creating like one set of interpretation for that, where like, well, we just have one platform for creating experiences and you can quickly jump between any of these experiences because it's like, it's all our platform. So in some ways you could view it as like a web browser, right? But like, it's still, you want to jump from like Roblox to like a Fortnite experience. Like so basically now we have a world where like Chrome goes to like one set of websites and like Microsoft Edge goes to another set of websites. Like, how does that make sense?
Yeah, there's still, here's the thing with metaverse, right? I'm glad you mentioned Roblox because the sneak attack is Roblox and what Epic is doing, right? Where they're buying all these like companies and game companies. Like they bought Fall Guys, they bought Rocket League, right? They have Fortnite, right? They're building their metaverse over sneakily with a gamer focused mind, right? Because in reality, metaverse is a game, right? Is a game that we own. I think the argument or the vision is conflicted right now because a lot of tech bros is taking a game concept and ignoring the game developers out of the equation. I have so many friends at these companies who are dedicated game developers, very senior, whose opinion is usually outweighed by execs or people outside of the game development space, right? They're just making these decisions because they reference movies or books and then completely ignore like the last 2 decades of the game developers making these type of universes, these ecosystems function, right? Really well, right? Growing communities and social interaction is part of the DNA of MMO, right? Of every genre that we have distinguished and accomplished. I mean, you're talking about basically every game at Blizzard that have built this components of what makes a metaverse, right? And I just feel like and continuously being ignored. I mean, the minute that John Carmack wasn't a part of Meta anymore, I was like, so it's like that's the direction they're going, and I think it's a huge mistake because you're ignoring a lot of experience there to create these world function, right? I always complain it and equate it to, I mean, how many game companies have we been at where like you let designers kind of go wild, right? Because I think, every game is a good balance of all disciplines. But, designers, I think for a while and still, right? They always champion the hub. It's like, oh, instead of a menu with options, what if it's a physical space that you can walk around and you can start the game and then you can go to option and change audio? It's like, why would I want that? Just go to let me play the game. So I feel like we're kind of in this weird conversation again. And it's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? We're in the hub, we can try shoes on. It's like, that is not cool at all. Why would I want to walk to a virtual store and then go through the physical, uh, stress of putting things on and like, mime that? It's like, well, there's nothing cool about that experience, right? I mean, having an avatar spin around like Fortnite and just throwing clothes on is good enough. I just feel like the uncool part about the UX, basically experience for the user, Apple have a better handle on things. They put that in the front lines all the time. Like all their devices, all about the user experience, and it shares the same DNA as game developers. It's about the user experience from the beginning to end. And I feel like a lot of these tech companies don't understand that, right? And I feel right now that is a crisis at Meta where nobody wants a Zoom VR. Like, who's asking? Like, every time I'm in a Zoom call, I'm counting the clock, of when I can leave it. I mean, that is and I'm sure Zoom people are constantly combating this. They're like, yeah, people are using us because they have to. But the number one complaint is nobody likes being in a Zoom meeting. There's nothing fun about meetings, right? So like if I have to meet or work with you and, all these demos showing like, yeah, you look at these legless avatars that are your coworkers. Like, I don't want to see my coworkers. There's nothing about my coworkers I don't want to see. Can I shoot them? Right? Can I push them around like Fall Guys? Right? Can we race through obstacles? I mean, that's what I care about. I don't want to talk to you about like in front of a whiteboard. So that misunderstanding of what VR and the potential of what makes VR great is completely thrown out the window, especially at Meta. I feel like they need to get their stuff together and just let the game developers go in there and do create fun experiences again, because I think that is the number one driver. Like when I look at the Apple stuff, it's a lifestyle stuff mostly, right? There were no games. But as a game developer and gamer, I was super impressed because it showed like, look at these experiences. And the theater mode, I mentioned this before, was nothing new. I mean, Meta has its own version, right? Not as polished, right? Presentation is everything and execution. But like, I've seen versions of that. I played with versions of that, but Apple just takes it to the next level, right? And it's just like, hey, you can change, who knows how well it works, but you can change your actual real world settings to kind of match with your virtual setting. I was like, dude, they're understanding what people want to use this for. And the whole idea with the metaverse, again, if you just take it away, from the VR space, they're misunderstanding what what's cool about metaverse, and I think it's going to be up to the other game developers, experienced game developers, to actually make the metaverse. To kind of respond to, like, is there having these different IPs? Is there a real interest in that, right? So, like, the closest thing, I'm thinking about this. Of course, Ready Player One is the number one reference that I feel like visually, like, okay, I kind of get it, right? But like realistically, it's kind of like walking in Dave and Buster's, right? And you have all these different arcade machines and different experiences that you can play with, and you just walk around with your friends. Uh, so I think at the earliest version, it's going to be something like that. Is like, can I walk into a space and then hang out with my friends with these different experiences, and it's going to be a lot of uh, obstacles, because now we have like 10 different metaverses. Do people want that? Do I want the Microsoft metaverse versus the Sony metaverse, right? And we only like one thing mostly, which is the Smash Brothers on Nintendo, right? Everything, there was so many companies trying to make Smash Brothers, but we always go back to Nintendo because they do it right. I think the same thing is going to happen. Eventually, there's going to be one metaverse, or maybe two, that people just flock to. Just like, and it's not a new concept. It's like I buy Blizzard games versus Riot games, right? Because I like Blizzard games are better than Riot games or whatever, right? And that's going to happen. And I assure you, it isn't going to be Facebook that makes me want to. It's going to be Epic or Roblox or like actual game developers who that understand that experience, that they're going to win, right? Because funny enough, they're not. I never really hear Roblox, right? Epic got a round of funding, to coining metaverse, but they don't really go all out in their monthly newsletter saying, "Hey, this metaverse is coming. I know you're waiting for it." They're just building up Fortnite, Fortnite, Unreal Editor for Fortnite. Getting the user generation there, get that Roblox money into their ecosystem, and they're just building it. And not just walking the walk. And I think they're probably going to get there faster than most people. But I think with tech, I just have this continued frustration of how game developers are constantly in the backseat of our creation, right? I don't know how you feel about it. That's a long rant, but like, there's this feeling that we're constantly being ignored, and these problems aren't new that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, you work in as my experience going from like a startup to a bigger and bigger company. Eventually, you lose a lot of creative freedom. Like there's a lot more, business kind of business decisions being made. So it's much more. I mean, if you raise money, if you're answering to investors, like you're also giving away some of your freedom, right? So, yeah, I suppose I don't know if, I guess like maybe there's like an alternate universe, kind of like those Marvel/DC alternate universes, where we can like look at like what a world where all the decisions are made by game designers and like what kind of chaos that causes. So it's I think like with Meta, you have a somewhat unique, I feel, situation where Mark has kept so much of his, as far as I understand, kind of control of the company.
Yeah.
Where I think potentially that's causing the situation where it's like an echo chamber where so much of the kind of like direction is kind of being pushed down from top down decision making, and it's like maybe people are not being heard. On the other hand, when you have a situation where you have like kind of like one key decision maker, you're able to make much more drastic changes faster, theoretically. Like, for better or worse, like, I don't know if Mark wasn't in charge, they would be pivoting so fast to focusing on VR, right? Because they're understanding that VR is the future. Well, I'm biased, of course, or AR, XR, whatever. But at least from their perspective, they're slowly seeing, even though Instagram is still, a massive user base, like Facebook user base, as far as I understand, kind of fell over time. And, Instagram is, kind of having to fight a big fight now with like TikTok. And, it's all about capturing, I guess, getting the kids hooked in your product as early as possible, because then they're gonna grow up and, stay hopefully as a users. So, until, because that's the issue, like products basically become less cool over time, especially once like a lot of the older people start using them. So kids kind of flock to new things. And I think I just saw news that Meta has announced that they're now allowing, like officially allowing 10-year-olds to use the platform. They're going to have some kind of probably like additional parental control systems or whatever. Fact of the matter is you probably already had like millions of like 9-year-olds playing and still playing like Gorilla Tag and stuff and like Rec Room on Quest, right? But they're, adapting the platform and, following whatever legal rules and such to make sure that it's hopefully a safe environment for 10 years and plus. Because like the other concern for XR was like, how does it impact like the eyes and such? So yeah. I'm assuming we've gotten enough data at this point to know that hopefully it's not, making everyone blind. Like, parents in the 90s kept saying, don't sit so close to the TV. And now we're literally strapping the TV to our faces. I think, for better or worse, Meta is trying to adapt to the times, and, grow beyond just being kind of like a social media platform. Right. So you got to give them, of course, they're still trying to be the social media platform on VR. And that's where I think they're struggling. Right. So, yeah, but I think the vision kind of makes sense. I think it's just a little bit too early. I think like, it's like, yeah, maybe you don't want to like go inside a shoe store and simulate like having to put on physically a shoe with a shoehorn, but you might want to just be able to like look at a shoe and it like appears on your feet and you're like, okay, these do look good on me. Like I'm going to order them and they're going to come to my house tomorrow because it's like Amazon or whatever, or whoever's taking the cut in this instance. So
brought to you by Apple.
Yeah, I think once we are in a situation where the form factor is so good and there's enough use cases for you to stay in these like devices all day long. Like I don't see like already more and more people are making like friends online. Like they just have like online only friends, like playing Roblox or whatever it is. So conceivably, like you could see the world continuously growing that way, but it's just, just creating a metaverse and declaring it's the metaverse, but then not actually having, I think like good fun experiences to back it up. That's the issue, because it's not creating enough of a reason for people to like be like want to go there and actually spend time there, right? So it's sort of like when we had the mad dash to like for esports like a few years back, and then so many games were just like saying like, oh, we're building an esport game, but like you kind of, or like the same with crypto, right? Like people were just like from the beginning we're saying, okay, we're going to build like a web, like a blockchain game, but the problem is they don't have a good game first made. Yeah. And you can't like go from like you're reversing the order of like what needs to be done first. You need to create a good, fun experience first. It's engaging for people that makes them want to stay.
Yeah. And I think, it's just going back to the drawing board of making a fun game. It seems to be like such a simple answer, but it's like the hardest part, making a fun experience that people can buy in. I definitely agree. Like there were a lot of positives too that Zuckerberg just spearheading. I mean, in a lot of, in retrospect, preemptively renaming the whole company after the metaverse, and then it's all about AI now. But there was a lot of positive that came out of that. A lot of attention, obviously, but there's a lot more units now because of it. And if anything, laid the foundation for Apple to come in and be a competitor, right? To kind of like take what's there and be able to elevate even further. And then hopefully there's a back and forth between the two. Um, and uh, I don't think he was wrong saying that it's a 5-10 year endeavor, right? Before it has massive appeal. Uh, I, the cool thing about the VR set, obviously, that isn't, like blockchain or all these other terms or technology that came out of COVID, is that it's practical. You put it on, you get it, right? I still don't know what blockchain is. I have no idea what it is. NFT, I have no idea who was buying it, right? I never really met anyone though. I knew a lot of friends that were selling it, right? And I was like, dude, like it was so scandalous, man, when they were telling me they were selling NFTs. Like, oh, people are buying it. I was like, I guess. And and when it's funny that the flip side right after COVID was suddenly AI art being controversial. I was like, now, NFT could have solved that problem, but yeah, I'm super thankful for you coming on. I'm always open to kind of get educated in this space. I always have I go off of my gut feelings on things, right? And so in terms of like the VR landscape, I'm excited that we're coming out of this like COVID period and into it, because I think that space is above every experience I've had with games. Like like even graphically, if it doesn't even meet standard graphic fidelity that we're used to with AAA, right? Because of the hardware limitation, you put it on, you don't even care as much. You're instantly immersed, and there's so much more potential. And I think these hardware barriers are soon going to be figured out, and I'm just hoping Apple just pushes us a little further, right? And it kind of wake up the meta guys a bit, because we need that back and forth. And Sony's kind of doing their own thing. The funny thing is Sony's probably doing both of those things right, but they're all for just PlayStation 5 owners, so they are in sort of a bubble. Whatever innovation they have, you don't really hear outside of that bubble as much as the Meta or Apple Vision Pro. For before I kind of shut up and hand over the mic, I do have one last question for the newcomers out there, right? For the people who are going into game development, right? The funny thing is, even though we're using the same tools, developing for VR, right, which is more limitation, what advice would you have for those people who are looking into the VR space to kind of be their first job, second job, third job, or making the jump from traditional AAA development, mobile development? Like, what are the things that usually you look at as being impressive to, like, hey, this might be a good route for you instead?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much overlap between traditional gaming and virtual gaming. We're using the same engines. Practically speaking, it's mostly Unity and Unreal. Actually, I hear it's 80% Unity for VR games nowadays.
Oh, wow.
It's just the teams are smaller. Yeah, I just heard that number from, maybe take it from a grain of salt, from Rick Tella, like the CEO of Unity at one of the Augmented World Expo talks. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can believe it because there's just so many more kind of like smaller, I think, like VR experiences, and also the biggest VR kind of platform is technically a mobile platform, it's the Quest. What VR makes different is the immersion, the fact that, the player is in the game, interacting with the game, using their head, their hands, now eyes, potentially, if you're on PSVR 2, hopefully future platforms, fingers, so like, hands and such. So it's a very different user experience. So if you're focused on player tech, like user user interface, player movement, player interactions with the game, controls, game feel, then VR is a very different uh, kind of development experience for you. Of course, like you could be an AI engineer working on creatures, but if they interact with the player in close quarters, then of course, then there's like some considerations of the fact that you're working in virtual reality. But a lot of your skill set and a lot of technology is going to carry over otherwise, right? Like an enemy outside of like how it gets close to you and interacts with you once it's in your like kind of like immediate space is probably going to be very similar in some ways. Like a lot of like locomotion, animation tech, and techniques, and cinematics, for example, like there's a challenge of making sure that the player is looking at where you want to look. But outside of that, it's still, if you're, for example, using Unreal, you're just going to be using sequencer and, keying things and making sure things flow well. Another big thing to learn about is like performance. VR's has very high performance requirements unless you're like on PC developing. But the PC is where you're going to iterate on the most. So if you're like starting out, I think you could probably build some interesting experiences as initial proof of concept to see if that's something that inspires you, or potentially like even release something as like early access on Steam first and start building a community. VR is, I think it's like, I think you got to give Quest the credit. They have just showcased kind of the latest slate of games that are coming out later this year at the Quest showcase. So we're seeing more like IP licenses, but also like games like with new IP from independent developers. There's a lot of things to play for inspiration beyond Half-Life Alyx. Of course, Half-Life Alyx kind of set the bar for really interactive, physicalized kind of environments, and I think that is like a big key part of kind of like next gen VR quality experiences, like being able to interact with the world around you in natural way. Like I heard the term like interaction density. Interaction density is much higher in VR versus traditional games because players just kind of expect to be able to touch and interact with everything. So if you have like that eye for wanting to add a lot of like detail to your environments, like that is kind of like superfluous really in some ways to like the core gameplay loop, just adding almost like fun ways for the player to interact and explore just for the sake of that, rather than like the direct, like, maybe combat loop. Then VR is probably a thing that you'll enjoy working on.
For sure. Well, I want to, this is the part of the podcast where I just shut up, hand the mic over to you to kind of, let you talk directly to listeners, how to find you, right? Further discuss things with you, or, what the next thing they can pick up that you worked on or to look forward to.
Sure. So I guess you can reach me on my company email. It's alex.silkin@servius.com. I'm pretty passionate about, engineering problems. Like, we use Unreal Engine. I love figuring out how to like push that engine, especially for, making, again, high quality virtual reality experiences. We're working on this on a game based on the Aliens movies. We're pretty excited about it. We're trying to create really something that feels like next gen VR. I'm excited to show more about that. But in the meantime, would love for you all to try our long library of different kinds of virtual reality games spanning across all genres, from shooting to racing. We have Creed is a big hit, but we actually have a big library of games that came out starting from like the PC VR days, like Raw Data, Sprint Vector, Battle Wake. We have a Walking Dead TV show licensed game called Walking Dead Onslaught. We also made a PC VR only game based on the Westworld game, Westworld TV show. We also have Puzzle Bobble, which is a puzzle game. Probably forgetting like at least one. yeah, so I think VR is getting really exciting. Also, like I said, the Quest just showcased um, the next slate of games, and PSVR also had their own showcase. I'm pretty excited about the next games that are coming out just this year and next year. So level, the industry is still growing, and the more people are buying games and talking about them, the more it's going to help the entire industry, really. So, and I love playing everything that other fellow devs are creating. It's great for inspiration and entertainment. I mean, that's why I basically got into this industry, because I love games.
Awesome, man. Don't sleep on VR, is the main message. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, man. And it was a pleasure meeting you, talking with you, and kind of learning from you. It's always a pleasure to kind of have experts like yourselves in that space, gauging your experience, your reactions to the news. It gives me a better gauge of like what's going on with all my brothers out there. So thank you for coming, and see you guys all next week.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hello, everybody. Brandon here. I want to talk to you today about something very special. We've been on this wild ride together, haven't we? From my early days as a senior employee, feeling a bit lost, all the way to leading multiple studios, transitioning to smaller indie teams and to the mobile industry, and now running my own game studio for the last 6 years. Throughout this time, you've been here listening and learning along with me, sharing this never-ending journey of discovery. This year, I'm kind of on this quest of meeting serial studio founders, discussing acquisitions, or exploring what it takes to grow a studio to over 100 developers. I've always tried to find an exciting topic to delve into, and every year is a little different. The focus is a little different because that's where I am in my career currently, and I want to be able to share what I'm learning with you guys. So I've always been dedicated to asking the tough questions, bringing you insightful answers from industry leaders and experts. And now I want to share with you how I'm applying these answers to my own journey. This is why I'm excited to announce that for just $1.99 per month, you can now subscribe to our exclusive content series. These bonus episodes will give you a deeper look into my personal experiences and how I'm putting into practice what our esteemed guests are preaching. It's more of a personal side of the journey that I hope will show you that we're all in this together and we're all continuously learning. Whether you're a game developer, studio founder, or just a passionate gamer, there's something in it for everyone. By subscribing, not only will you gain access to this exclusive content, but you also be supporting the ongoing production of the regular programming. It helps keeps the lights on and ensures that I can continue bringing you top quality content and insight into the world of game development. The links to subscribe are in the description. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep doing what I love, sharing this journey with you. So show some love, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue this adventure together. Thank you all for your continued support. And as always, stay tuned for more exciting content. Until next time, this is Brandon, signing off.